that Angkor was the largest settlement complex that had ever been built in all of human history before the Industrial Revolution.
The jungle of Cambodia has spent nearly 1,000 years trying to reclaim the largest temple in the world. Angkor Wat is famous for its beauty, but new technology just revealed a terrifying flaw in the history books. Researchers fired lasers through the canopy and found a hidden city grid larger than modern Paris. But get this. Deep under the main sanctuary, the sensors hit something cold and hollow. It was a sealed vault protected by warnings of giant snakes.
We found hundreds and hundreds of additional temples, the remains of canals, even a small road from 1,000 years ago.
Breaking that seal didn't just release stale air, it released a warning that the world ignored for too long. What the lasers saw in the dark. The sun was beating down on the stone causeway, making the air shimmer with heat. It was a typical day in Cambodia, hot, sticky, and loud with the sounds of the jungle. But for the team of engineers and archaeologists standing near the western gate, the world had gone quiet. They were staring at a monitor that was hooked up to a heavy cart. This cart carried a ground-penetrating radar unit, a machine designed to see through solid rock like it was glass. They were looking for cracks in the foundation. They were looking for water damage. Basically, they were doing routine maintenance. But here's the catch, the image on the screen wasn't showing cracks, it was showing a void.
The problem here is that you can be standing right in the middle of a city, a 1,000-year-old city, and not even know that you're right on top of it. Once you get up in the air, you're able to map these things. You can see the spatial patterning, the traces of these things in the landscape.
The radar sends pulses of energy into the ground. When those pulses hit something solid, they bounce back. When they hit empty space, they keep going. The screen was painting a picture of a long, dark tunnel running deep under the sandstone blocks. It looked like a vein running under the skin of the temple. The lead engineer tapped the screen, thinking it was a glitch. He reset the machine. He ran the cart over the same spot again. The result was the same. There was a massive empty space right under the main walkway where millions of tourists walk every year. It's not that simple, though. This wasn't just a hole in the dirt. The radar data showed straight lines. Nature doesn't make straight lines, nature makes curves and chaos. These lines were sharp. They were walls. The team expanded their grid, they pushed the heavy equipment back and forth across the hot stones for hours. As they stitched the data together, a pattern emerged that made the hair on their arms stand up. It wasn't just one tunnel, it was a spiral. A massive, coiled structure made of packed sand and masonry that wound its way underneath the temple complex. It looked like a giant snake curled up beneath the floor. The sheer size of it was impossible.
In South Asian traditions, Nagas occupy an important place. They are considered to be very powerful creatures. They are shapeshifters, and Nagas share a number of interesting similarities with Chinese dragons.
This structure was over a mile long if you uncoiled it, but it had been invisible for 9 centuries. The crazy part is what happened next. As they moved closer to the central sanctuary, the holiest part of the site, the equipment started acting strange. Batteries that were fully charged suddenly drained to zero. The digital display flickered with static. One of the seismic sensors, which listens to the vibrations in the ground, picked up a low-frequency hum. It wasn't coming from the wind or the tourists, it was coming from below. The local workers stepped back. They knew the legends. They knew that the temple was built on restless earth. They warned the team that some doors are sealed for a reason. But scientists are driven by curiosity, not superstition. They marked a spot on the ground where the tunnel seemed to come closest to the surface. It was a small, unassuming patch of dirt near the base of the central tower. They started to dig. The soil was hard, packed down by 1,000 years of rain and foot traffic.
When we look at the Angkor temples, we're often fascinated by the fact that the joints in between blocks, in between sandstone blocks, are extremely thin.
It took hours to get through the top layer. Sweat was pouring off the workers, turning the dust into mud. Then a shovel hit something hard. It wasn't a rock, it was a smooth, flat slab of stone. It was a capstone. They cleared the dirt away from the edges. The stone was sealed with a type of mortar that hadn't been used since the 12th century. This wasn't a repair job, this was the original construction. And right in the center of the slab, barely visible after all this time, was a carving. It was a naga, a 7-headed cobra. But this Naga wasn't protecting the Buddha like the ones on the roof. This Naga was coiled tight, its hood flared, its fangs bared. It was a warning sign. The team paused. The air around the hole felt cooler than the rest of the jungle. A faint draft was seeping up through the cracks in the mortar. It smelled old. It smelled like wet dust and something metallic, like old copper pennies. The lead archaeologist gave the nod. They used crowbars to pry the stone loose. With a grinding noise that echoed off the temple walls, the slab shifted. Darkness poured out of the hole. They dropped a glow stick into the opening. It fell for about 20 feet before hitting the floor. The green light revealed a narrow corridor, its walls lined with strange, porous stone. This passage had been sealed off from the world since the days of the Crusades, and now it was open. The team rigged a pulley system and prepared to descend. They thought they were entering a treasury or a tomb for a king. They had no idea they were stepping into a crime scene. The darkness waiting below was about to reveal a secret that would shake the entire scientific community. Entering the serpent's den, the air inside the tunnel was thick. It felt heavy in the lungs, low on oxygen and high on dust. As the first team member reached the bottom, his boots crunched on something brittle. He shined his flashlight at his feet. The floor wasn't stone. It was covered in a layer of fine white powder. He knelt down and touched it. It was bone dust. He signaled for the others to come down. The corridor was tight, barely wide enough for two people to stand side by side. The walls were damp. Moisture had been trapped down here for centuries, turning the limestone slimy. But as they moved forward, the beam of their flashlights caught carvings on the walls. And get this, these weren't the peaceful carvings of dancers and gods that you see upstairs. These were scenes of chaos. The carvings showed figures being dragged into the water. They showed the Naga snakes wrapping around people's chests, squeezing the life out of them. It was a narrative of punishment. The further they walked, the more violent the images became. It was like walking through a storybook where the ending is a nightmare. The tunnel led to a single circular chamber. In the center of the room stood a low stone altar. It was simple, unadorned, and made of black rock that absorbed the light. But it was what was arranged around the altar that stopped the team in their tracks. There were bones, a lot of them. But this wasn't a mass grave where bodies were just thrown in. This was a pattern. The skulls were arranged in perfect concentric circles radiating out from the altar. The ribs were stacked like firewood. The long bones of the legs were laid out in straight lines pointing toward the center. It was geometric. It was precise. And that made it terrifying.
When you walk in there, you'll see bones stacked. They're everywhere. You'll have thigh bones stacked up in places. You'll have skulls stacked in other places. It's almost like a warehouse of human bones.
The team's forensic expert moved closer. He noticed something on the wrists of the skeletons. There were faint green stains on the bone. Copper. These people had been bound with copper wire, and looking at the fractures in the skulls, it was clear their end was swift. This wasn't a disease. This wasn't a war. This was a ritual sacrifice on a scale that nobody thought the Khmer Empire practiced. On the black altar sat 3 small pottery jars. They were sealed with wax that had turned to stone over the ages. The lead archaeologist carefully picked one up. It was light. He used a small knife to scrape away the seal. Inside, there was a dark, dried residue. They took samples right there in the flickering light. Later, lab results would confirm the impossible. The residue contained traces of mercury, sulfur, and organic proteins. It was a mixture designed to preserve or perhaps to trap. The mix of chemicals was highly toxic. Whoever drank this or whoever this was poured on would have suffered immensely. What most people don't realize is that the Khmer people were incredibly advanced. They were masters of water and stone. They didn't do things like this without a desperate reason. You don't build a secret, reinforced bunker under your most holy site just to hide a few bodies. You do it to contain a disaster. The walls of the circular chamber had writing on them. It was faint, etched lightly into the stone. The translator on the team squinted at the ancient Sanskrit. He read the words out loud, his voice shaking slightly in the cold, damp air. To keep the balance, to feed the hunger, to hold back the water. The team looked at each other. To hold back the water, they were miles inland. The jungle was dry. But then the pieces started to click together. The spiral tunnel, the snake carvings, the arrangement of the bones. The Naga is a water deity. In Cambodian legend, the Naga controls the rain and the rivers. If the Naga is angry, the land floods. If the Naga is pleased, the crops grow. This chamber wasn't just a grave, it was a desperate bribe. The realization hit them hard. The timeline of these bones matched the sudden collapse of the empire in the 15th century. The climate data from that time shows massive mega droughts followed by catastrophic floods.
It shows us these incredible droughts, these periods of 20 or 30 years of very, very low rainfall right at the end of the Angkor period.
The civilization was dying. Their crops were failing. Their intricate water systems were breaking down. In a final, terrified attempt to save their world, they went underground. They built this vault. They made the ultimate sacrifice to the gods of the water, hoping to stop the end of the world. They sealed the room, walked away, and let the jungle take over. They left their offering in the dark, praying it would be enough. But looking at the ruins above, we know it wasn't. The discovery of the vault was shocking, but it was only one piece of the puzzle. To understand why they were so scared, the scientists had to zoom out. They had to look at the bigger picture, and to do that, they needed lasers. The warning in the vault was about to make sense on a massive scale. Hidden in plain sight. For decades, archaeologists were walking over the answers without knowing it. The jungle floor is thick. You can stand 10 feet away from a massive ruin and not see it because of the vines and the trees. It's basically a green curtain that hides everything. For a long time, everyone assumed Angkor Wat was a solitary city, a cluster of temples surrounded by wild forest. But then came LiDAR. LiDAR is like a super scanner mounted on a helicopter. It shoots millions of laser beams down at the ground every second. These lasers can poke through the gaps in the leaves and hit the dirt below. By measuring how long it takes for the laser to bounce back, computers can strip away the trees digitally. It turns a 3D forest into a bare earth map. When the researchers processed the data for the area around Angkor, they sat in stunned silence. The screen didn't show a few temples in the jungle, it showed a metropolis. The map revealed a massive, rigid grid system extending for hundreds of square miles. It was huge. We are talking about an urban sprawl that covered an area larger than modern-day Paris or Philadelphia, and this was in the 12th century. It was the largest pre-industrial city in the history of the world. Over 1 million people lived here, but here's the deal. This wasn't just a city of houses and markets. It was a machine. The entire landscape had been engineered. Every hill, every river, every pond was man-made or modified. The grid was a complex hydraulic system. It was a water engine.
One of the more interesting features that we see about Angkor is its hydraulic network. Its network of canals and reservoirs, which has been the focus of a lot of debate, a lot of research, and a lot of scholarship in the last few decades.
The Khmer builders had reshaped the face of the earth to catch the monsoon rains. They built massive reservoirs called barrays that were 5 miles long. These weren't just swimming pools, they were batteries. They stored the water during the wet season so they could release it during the dry season to grow rice. They could grow 3 or 4 crops a year while the rest of the world was lucky to get one. This immense surplus of food is what allowed them to build the stone temples. Rice was their money. Water was their power. The lasers showed canals that were perfectly straight for miles. They showed dikes and spillways that acted like modern valves. It was a level of civil engineering that wouldn't be seen again until the modern era. They had effectively terraformed their environment to control the weather. However, the LiDAR map revealed something else. It showed the flaws. When the team looked closely at the grid near the end of the Empire's timeline, they saw chaos. The straight lines were broken. The canals were silted up. The massive spillways had been breached. The map showed a system that had been pushed too far. The machine had broken down. This connects directly to the horror found in the underground vault. The Empire had grown too big. They had cut down too many trees to fuel their iron smelters and build their houses. This deforestation changed the local climate. The soil eroded and filled up the canals. The water stopped flowing. Then the mega monsoons came and smashed the infrastructure to pieces. Is our civilization making the same mistakes as the Khmer Empire, or can we actually engineer our way out of disaster? Smash that like button if you love history mysteries and subscribe for more deep dives into the unknown.